Hello, I'm Damien Callan. Welcome to day 2 of 14 days of art. Today you see my face as well as my hands, but you see mainly my hands because I'm going to be demonstrating a technique drawing a still life using ink and wash. So I've set up on the table some cups and sugar bowl and jug from the kitchen, and I've got my piece of cartridge paper set out on a board so I can draw and so that you can see what I'm drawing. And I'm going to be working with a little pot of Indian ink, some diluted ink called wash, so that's the same ink but just with some water, and I'm going to draw either with a sharpened stick. This is just a piece of willow. You can get a stick from the garden, or I could also use, I've sharpened the end of a paintbrush. Take care, don't make it too sharp. And I'm going to apply the wash with a piece of sponge that I've broken off from a larger bit of sponge. I'm going to begin by drawing my objects with the sharpened stick dipped in the ink. And this is how I do it. So I'm going to make a line drawing, and I'm going to begin probably with the big cup. The top of that cup is if you look down on it, it's a circle. But because I'm looking across, I've got much more of an ellipse. It's like a squashed circle. And I'll start there and I'll work my way around the cup, seeing what joins up with what. But I'm just going to do lines. I'm not going to worry about shade, tone. I'll do the pattern in a moment, but I'll just start with some lines. Now I always say to people, particularly the children, when I get them to work with ink, what's the worst thing about ink? And the answer, of course, is you can't rub it out. Then I say to them, what's the best thing about ink? And the answer is the same. The best thing about ink is you can't rub it out, so you've just got to be much bolder and decisive about what you do. So here, for example, I'm a little bit unsure about this jug. So what I'm going to do, rather than put down a thick, heavy line that I can't manage, I'm going to let the ink dry out on the stick and just draw with what's left on the stick. So there's just a little bit of, there's almost no ink, but it allows me just to do a kind of grey mark, which isn't too definite. And if I'm reasonably happy with that, then I can go over it. I've gone off the page a bit here, never mind. So let the ink dry out on the stick a little bit. If you want to do some marks to find your way, some provisional marks, and then you can go over them with a bit more ink. Very often when you do a drawing, especially a line drawing, it's good to vary the line, to have heavy lines in certain places and lighter, finer lines in others. But when you're working with the ink and the stick, that's all decided for you. You have much less control, and so you get a great variety of lines. And again, it's just very liberating. You know, if you find you're someone who draws and you get very tentative and you keep rubbing things out or you keep correcting things, the ink is great because it doesn't allow you to do that. You either make a mark or you don't, and that's it. And usually you end up making quite a lot of marks that you can be fairly happy with. It's definitely a loose way of working, but loose, liberating or liberated drawings are often much more interesting, much more satisfying. So I've done outlines to these 3 objects, and now I'm going to do a bit of the pattern. And I'm just suggesting the pattern. They've got various flowers and plants on the sides of these pots and the cups and jugs, and I'm just making as I say, an approximate suggestion of some of those patterns. And again, there's a slightly grayer mark there if the ink's run out. So this technique, I'm doing it in 3 stages. I'm starting, as I've shown you just now, with a line drawing. Sometimes there are places where it might be worth doing a double line, like the edge of the sugar bowl there. That gives it a bit more form. Maybe the inside of the bowl. I won't do a whole line, I'll just do a dotted line. The edge of the cup as well. It'd be quite nice to have a double line and the jug here. So now and then I've added some extra outlines to create a bit more form. But I'm not worrying about light and shade, tone or contrast. That's what I do next. That's the line drawing, done with the stick and the ink. I would now let that dry. I don't know, 5 minutes should do it. And then if I have a little look under here, surprise, surprise, in the true, here's one I prepared earlier, tradition. Oh, there's another one underneath. So I would let that dry, and it might look a bit like this. Because I think it helps to separate the line drawing from putting on the wash, the tone. So as I said, the wash is the same ink, but it's been diluted quite a lot. Ink is fantastically black and strong, so you need quite a lot of water. I'll just try that out on the masking tape. That's fairly dark, but that's quite good. I've got a piece of sponge, just torn off a larger piece of sponge, which is good because it means that it's an interesting shape. It's got some thin, fine bits and some thicker parts. So just like the stick, I'm going to draw in a much freer way. When I look at my setup, it can be difficult to decide what's light and what's dark. I've got dark patterns, I've got shadows. So I'll start with the shadows. The sugar bowl, for example, is casting a shadow over here. I've got a window on my right, so the light is coming on from there. I look with my eyes half closed, and I can just see these shadows being thrown off to the side. And there's one for the jug there. So as soon as I do that, my objects stand out a bit more now. They've cast a shadow, so there's a sense of light, light and shadow. The sugar bowl, again, I'm looking with my eyes half closed, and most of the side of the sugar bowl is dark. So I'll just block that in. And then the jug has got a dark handle. And the inside of the jug is also quite dark. I'll get that filled in. As with the stick and the ink drying out a bit, you can let the ink dry out a bit on the sponge and maybe make some slightly softer bits of contrast. So I'm going to do a little bit of the pattern now to try and use up some of the ink that's on the sponge, because I'd quite like to put down some grayer marks or some more broken marks. For example, with the jug, the left side of the jug, as I look at it, is in shadow. So if I just get a little bit of the remaining ink on the sponge, I can do that. Put on that bit of contrast, and also the inside of the sugar bowl. So when there's a bit less, I mean, it's good basically to have one strength of wash so that you have to decide what's light, what's dark. But you can adapt that a bit by working with either another layer of wash to darken things or some of this leftover wash. So that was some of the leftover wash, which has allowed me to knock back some of the light areas, but I could also get a stronger amount now and darken a few places a bit further, those places that had the most contrast. This stage of putting on the wash is very, very quick. You quite quickly establish some of the dark shapes, and a second layer, as I said, will allow you to refine it a bit more. Now, there can be one more stage to this whole process. I think that's virtually all I need to do to those objects, the shadows that they've cast, the patterns that they have on their surfaces. One last stage would be to take some chalk or some charcoal. The beauty of the ink is that it's decisive, it's immediate, you can't change it, so you get a strong impression. But when that's dry, as the one underneath will be, it can be quite nice to have a final stage where, oh no, the objects are in the wrong order. Never mind. I'll just show you this last stage. It's quite nice to be able to do a little bit of refining. So with a stick of willow charcoal, I can darken some of those areas, like the inside of the jug. I want that to be a bit darker. Maybe actually the inside of the cup. It would be quite nice to knock back this sugar bowl. So you can see that you can make quite small changes with the charcoal. You can smudge it, and actually you could rub the charcoal off if you didn't like it. And a stick of white chalk, it's also possible to get back a bit more of the lighter contrast. So if I was looking for an edge to my sugar bowl, and again the chalk can be rubbed off. So this is having put down a first set of light and dark marks with the sponge and the stick. You can actually do some small refinements, but because the ink is so permanent, you won't lose that stronger initial start that you created with the stick and the sponge. So I'll post the finished drawing, or I'll attach it to the end of the email, and I'll also be giving you a handout with the steps set out for exactly what I did. So good luck, enjoy your ink and your wash.